you've been blogging for even a handful of years, you probably have hundreds or thousands of blog posts in your archives at this point. And maybe you've wondered how to figure out whether you should update those posts or you should delete them or something else. This video is for you, and I'm going to show you what my process is for figuring out what to do with your old content. Hey friends, I'm Madison from Grace and Vine Studios, and I'm also a food blogger who manages over 900 blog posts between my two blogs, which was a number that shocked me, honestly. And over the years, I have gone through many iterations of this process to figure out what to do with my old content and how to figure out whether it is a good fit. So I'm so excited to walk you through that process in today's video. The first thing I want to mention is that this is a process that you can and should be going through regularly. This is not just a one-time thing where you review all of your blog posts in a content audit, which is something that I've talked about in the past, and I can link to a blog post all about how to conduct a content audit in the description below. But this is really something that you're doing on an ongoing basis as a continual review of your content and where it stands in terms of, is it performing well? Does it need an update or does it need to be fixed in some other way? This is really something that you should be doing on maybe even a monthly basis in chunks as you review, however many posts that you have. And I also want to mention, this is something that I've done both on my own and with team members. So whether you are a solo blogger running your whole operation on your own, or you've brought in team members, this is a great way for you to just take care of this backlog of content that is growing every single time you publish a new blog post. So when you're reviewing your old content, there's really 4 things that you can do with any piece of content that you have. The first is to keep it and leave it as is, and that's usually for blog posts that are newer or blog posts that are in good standing. Now, for the rest of your content, which honestly, for a lot of us, the amount of content that we have that is performing really well is pretty small in comparison to the library of content that we have. So for the rest of the content that isn't performing super well and isn't driving the majority of your traffic, you have 3 options. You can update the post, you can delete the post, or you can leave the post but no index it or de-index it, which essentially means to hide it from search results. So we're going to dive into each of those and how I decide which one goes into which category. Now, the easiest bucket of content to decide on and to fill is really that keep bucket. It's pretty obvious what you need to just kind of leave as is and just let it do its thing until another time. Where it gets tricky is deciding between whether to update a post or whether to delete or no index it, and we'll talk about those 2 things in here in a second. So when it comes to updating, there's a couple of things that I'm looking at that will help me to decide that a post deserves an update, and it's going to go on our calendar most likely as a republished blog post. The first is that it needs new photos. Now, being somebody who has been blogging since 2015, I have gone through a lot of my posts over the years to update photos, especially as my photography skills have improved. I have some really embarrassing old photos. Maybe I'll throw some of them in this video just for proof. But those are things that when I'm looking through a blog post, it's really obvious to me really quickly if the photos are up to par with the standard that I have now and the standard that my readers probably expect if they are clicking to my newer content and seeing that content, and then they flash back to something from 2015, it just isn't a good vibe. So that's the first thing that will get kind of a look to push it into the update bucket, is if it needs new photos. It also could be that it is missing certain photos. So I'll be honest, I was a pretty lazy blogger for a lot of years and did not do any process photos. So for a lot of our content, the hero photos might be good, but there's no process photos or there isn't an ingredient image. And so I'll go back and add those in. And that's a lighter lift for me when I'm updating an old blog post that just needs 1 or 2 photos versus an entire reshoot. Now, the second kind of bucket within updating content would be something that needs a full rewrite. So that has come up a lot over the years as our kind of standard has changed. And I actually have an entire SOP that I've written for my writing team that we can reference. And so a lot of the time, a blog post just doesn't fit that SOP because we've changed and updated so many things over the years. So if it's a blog post that has lots of long paragraphs or lots of just unnecessary storytelling, then it might fit into that update the writing bucket. And then there's also a handful of posts that will usually just need a little bit of tweaking. Maybe they need some of my newer blocks that are designed for my like updated design changes that I've made. Maybe it just needs, an affiliate disclaimer added or moved or something like that. And we call those quick updates. Those don't usually go onto our actual republish calendar. We can just slot those in and just update it as is, but without changing like the published date and bringing it to the top of our blog feed. So basically, to recap that, a blog post might go into the update bucket if it needs new photos, it needs the content rewritten, or it just needs a freshening up of the content with a quick update. Now, the second bucket is deleting your content. And this is one that doesn't get filled as much, but I will be honest, this is just something intuitively, I just know like this post has got to go when I see it. And typically that's something like the niche is completely different. If you've been around for a while, maybe you have niched down, or maybe like me, you've actually de-niched your blog a little bit. And so when you find stuff that's kind of in that old niche that was a little bit too narrow, you might decide it just isn't a good fit for your blog going forward. It also could be a blog post that doesn't have much keyword value at all, or it isn't something that people are searching for on Pinterest. And so there's just really no point in having a blog post on your site that nobody is looking for because nobody's going to find it. So it's just taking up space. Another reason you might delete a blog post is if it's duplicate content. Now, I know when I say those words, you're probably like, whoa, duplicate content, that's not good. But I don't mean it the way that you are maybe thinking of it when you hear that phrase. What I mean by duplicate content is maybe you have a recipe that you reworked slightly and created a new blog post off of that. Something where the two posts are so similar that Google might actually get confused about which one should go for which blog post. So this could be basically the same recipe in two different posts, but maybe neither is really doing well, or one is doing really, really well and another is not. And so you decide you're going to delete the one that isn't performing very well. So if it fits into any of those buckets, or frankly, you just really don't want to have the blog post on your site anymore for whatever reason, it's your blog, so you can decide. If it's not a good fit for your audience anymore, and it's not something that you really want to spend the time updating, then maybe it goes into that deleting bucket. Now, when you are deleting content, and I'm going to have an entire freebie that's linked in the description below that's really going to help walk you through this process even more and give you some pretty clear steps on how to delete things in the proper way from a technical perspective. But if you are deleting a blog post and you can redirect it to something that makes sense, so let's say, for example, in that example of two blog posts that are duplicate content, maybe you decide to redirect to the one that you're keeping because the two are so similar that it just makes sense. That is a good example of when a redirect would make sense. It wouldn't make sense to redirect, let's say, a French toast casserole to a grilled chicken recipe, right? Like that's pretty obvious, but you'd be surprised what people do sometimes. So don't redirect to a post that isn't pretty closely matched to the intent that someone might find that post. If I click on a link for French toast casserole and I end up on grilled chicken drumsticks, it's not a good match. If you can't find something that is a good fit, don't worry about the redirect at all. You don't need to redirect it to your homepage. You don't need to redirect it to anywhere. A 404 in this case is totally fine from Google's perspective. So don't redirect just for the sake of kind of checking that box. Only redirect if it makes sense. Okay, and then our last option that I mentioned is to archive or de-index this post. So I've heard it called no indexing. I've heard it called two different things, no indexing or de-indexing. In this case, they're the exact same thing from what we're talking about. But basically what you're doing is you're keeping the blog post on your website, but you are telling Google, don't look at this blog post anymore. And what that does is it allows it to still be in your archives for whatever reason you want to keep it, but you're not risking Google reading that as kind of your best content or anything like that. I won't go into the specifics of kind of crawl budget and all of those things. That's a little bit too technical for what we're talking about today. But basically you say like, this is a good post for my audience. It's a good post that I want to just keep around. Or maybe it's something that you don't want to work on right now, but eventually you're going to want to redo that post. You can keep it as a no indexed post and come back to it later. Because here's the deal. We can't really know what Google is going to decide to pick up. And if Google decides to crawl some of this thinner content that needs an update and isn't the highest level of your, the caliber of your blog post now, there's nothing we can do to really decide what Google's going to crawl. So if it's something that you wouldn't want Google or your audience to see, then deleting it or de-indexing it really is the best way to approach that situation. And it usually comes down to, do I want this for later or do I not? Because if you want it for later, it's better to keep that URL intact because it's an older URL than something newer. And so that can be helpful for SEO. So if you know that you're going to eventually redo it, but you're just not ready to now, keeping it kind of in play is a really good way to handle that. Now, one extra thing that I do want to mention that is helpful to consider if you are thinking about deleting or de-indexing a post is, can you repurpose that post in a different way? So if you create ebooks for your audience, for example, could that recipe that Google probably doesn't care about be repurposed in an ebook that you can sell to your audience? This is a really great way to, make use of work that you did in the past, but use it for something that is going to not necessarily matter from an SEO perspective. So I mentioned that this is a process that we do monthly, and this is a process that my blog manager actually helps to facilitate. So what she does is every month she will bring a batch of these blog posts to my attention and let me know kind of what her recommendation is, whether it's to keep the post as is and just monitor it, to make changes to it, to de-index it, or to delete it. And so, like I said, in the description below, I have a freebie for you, which basically goes through this framework of how we decide what to delete and what to keep and what to do with it. So definitely check that out so that you can kind of be walked through this process. But basically, so the framework and kind of what we're looking at for every post that we're reviewing is, what is the current keyword and possible SERP position? Sometimes there's no ranking at all. And so we just put it's not currently ranking for the chosen keyword. We also look at the traffic data. So what we're looking at is, in the last year, how many page views has this actually brought in? Because sometimes even if a post isn't really ranked super high, it might have brought in a few thousand page views. Or maybe it's a post that does really well in January and the rest of the year it just doesn't do well. So annually, it's not going to have as high of a traffic, threshold as something else. But if it does bring in a few thousand page views every January, we might keep it for that purpose. We also like to look at whether that traffic has increased or decreased year over year, because that helps us to be able to see if it's trending downward or upward. Sometimes updates take a while for them to sort of take hold. And so we like to be looking at how is this trending over a year period, or maybe 6 months over 6 months. We use an analytics tool to do that, but you can also do that right in Google Search Console or in another tool of your choosing. I also really like to look at how much revenue did this blog post bring in, because there have been some times where I'm on the fence about whether to update a post or not. And I'll look at my Raptive data and it's brought in $30 or something really low for the entire year. And so for me, it just isn't even worth updating, because it would cost me more money to update that post than it has brought in. And the potential is really low. That's of course different if it's a high volume keyword, especially with low difficulty or something like that, or it just really fits what my audience, is looking for from me. So it's really, you're coming at it from kind of all the different sides. We also like to look at the quality and the niche and how this post fits into those things. So we look at, what are the photo quality, or what is the photo quality? Do we have all the types of photos that we like to have in our posts? Is it well written, or is it thin content? And then does it fit my current niche? So I mentioned earlier, if you have niched down or niched up in a way, if you've kind of gone from a super micro niche up, the post might not fit into what you're currently talking about. And so it might not be worth keeping around anymore. This is something that we just started doing pretty recently with all of the changes that have happened within Google, and specifically with AI overviews coming into play. But we look at, is there an AI overview in the primary keyword? Because AI overviews can change. Google likes to change, whether a keyword has them or not. But for me, if it has an AI overview and I'm not ranking, it may not be worth as much time, implementing as much time to fix that post if there's an AI overview, just because the traffic that comes from that might be much less. And so we just like to document whether or not that, kind of result is showing up. And then once we've evaluated all of that and sort of tracked all of that, we track it right in ClickUp, because I have a system where I have a task for every single blog post that lives on our site. So we just literally document that right in the task. Then we're able to make a decision. Do we keep it? Do we update it? Or do we delete or de-index it? So I hope this has been really helpful to see kind of what that process looks like. There's a little bit of intuition and a gut check, but it also comes down to data and looking at what the post is doing in terms of performance and Does it have a place in the future of your blog or not? Make sure you check out our content audit template in the description below. It's going to help you to walk through this process and put this on a rhythm within your business so that you are consistently looking at your posts and looking for which ones need to be updated or kept as is, or maybe they need to be deleted. This content audit structure and template really helps you to just take the emotion out of making this decision and use data to back up what you decide to do for that blog post. And let me know in the comments below, if you are a blogger, how do you feel about deleting your old content? Does it make you nervous, or are you happy to let it go? I'll see you next time.